All right, welcome to Learning Objectives. Let's get started. Given what you know about your learner and what you decided was your instructional goal, now's the time to start to design the instruction by writing the learning objectives in some logical sequence of learning. This is what instructional design is all about. Remember, I am building my presentation off of what I know about writing learning objectives and instructional design. But check out what Julie Dirksen wrote in Chapter 3. That will give you another foundation and another perspective of what this week's lesson is about. Let's take a little review, walk down memory lane. We are in the ADDIE model. We are currently doing task and job analysis along with the goal of writing objectives by the end of this presentation. This will be a walkthrough. I am not going to talk through the whole presentation. I'm going to let you pause this screencast and you can read some of the content on the slide. When you see hyperlinks, follow them. I'm giving you some rabbit trails to more information. Take a journey, go see what's out there, come back and continue the presentation. Remember, we talked about instructional problems. They've got to be something about human performance, a deficiency in knowledge or skill. These are things we can solve with instruction. There are many things we cannot solve with instruction, though many people keep trying. Also remember, you're thinking about who your audience is, knowing them, and the more specifically you can know them, the better you will be able to design the instruction for them. Developing a goal of learning is part of the process of identifying the instructional problem and then developing sort of a problem statement. That is one of the assignments for this week that you will collaborate with your classmates on. Follow that link to see who Robert Gagne is. He is a founding father in this particular field of instructional design, along with a few others. The goal analysis is part of defining what is the purpose of this whole instructional idea that you are developing to create your mini lesson. As a goal, it's huge, and we can't accomplish a goal unless we start breaking that down into subtasks. So a little task analysis will be in order, and let's take a look, a little overview of what that is. So we got a big goal, and we want to say here's subtask 1, here's subtask 2, and then it has subtasks. And if you go from the bottom up and you accomplish the task, by the time you come to the goal, you should have acquired all of the knowledge and skills necessary in order to achieve the goal of the instruction. When you create your mini lesson, and by way of using your ISD planning doc or your blueprint, you will have a few subtasks, maybe let's say 7 plus or minus 2, but it might be closer to the 5 to 7 range. And each one of those tasks will have a learning objective. So your mini lesson for 30 to 60 minutes of instruction typically would have approximately 5 learning objectives. Keep that in mind. Let's take a closer look at the task analysis. But before we do that, you've got to be ready. Did you download the assignments from our Canvas site, the ISD planning doc, the light version, but also download the ISD planning document that is the blueprint. So you can see those two. The light version is simply a smaller version of the bigger document. You can use that right now if you have it up and available to you while you're looking at this slide presentation, so that you can work inside that document as we go along. So what is this thing we call a task analysis? Breaking down the big goal into sub-steps so that you know where you want to lead your learner, and those sub-steps are just big enough for your learner to move from one to the other without falling through the gap in between. It gives you an overview as the designer of all of the content of the instructional lesson that you are designing. The first thing we do is we take your goal. We take that goal and we ask ourselves a question. The question is this: what in the world does that learner need to know or be able to do before they can achieve the goal of this instruction that I'm planning? And the first thing that you write it down right now in your ISD plan document light. Just stop the video, go write it down. Come on back. With that answer that you wrote down in step 1, you look at that answer and you ask yourself the question again, but you change it just slightly. Listen carefully. What does the learner need to know or be able to do before they can achieve that task that I just wrote down? Now write that answer down. Put it down in the task list. And guess what? You're going to keep going. For step 3, given your answer to step number 2, ask yourself the question. What does the learner need to know or be able to do before they can achieve that task? Write it down. Put it down in your ISD plan doc under the tasks. Should be the third one there. You keep going until you have a list of tasks and you finally get to a task that is so basic that every person entering into your training environment knows how to do it. Of course, you need to know who your learners are in order to know what is their baseline understanding and knowledge for the content that you want to deliver. Tasks aren't the only thing. They're just one of the many building blocks to get us to developing the learning objectives. So given what you've written for the tasks, there's a one-to-one correspondence between the task and the learning objective. This is the beginning of the instructional design process. Let's get into writing objectives. But first, maybe you need to take a break. Pause the video and then come on back. Learning objectives. What is it? It describes the activity of the learner upon mastery, not where they are when they start the lesson, but where they will be after the instruction. In business, it's usually focused on job-related skills and knowledge. In education, objectives tend to come out of the realm of standards or benchmarks that learners need to be able to demonstrate. Getting a little bit more specific about it, it's a tactical approach to solving the instructional problem. Very explicit, gives some way of accomplishing the learning, and it's bound in time so that you're not taking a year to get through your mini lesson that really only should take 30 to 60 minutes. It's quantifiable, meaning it can be measured. You can see what the outcomes are. And of course, it's related to the goal of the instruction. There are basically 3 things in the world that you can teach someone. You can teach them how to think, you can teach them how to act, and you can teach them how to feel. Take a look at this slide, which the whole deck in itself is kind of like a small little book with me just trying to give you a quick summary of what did I mean when I made that page. Learning objective examples, very basic. So television's broken. And your learner's going to master how to fix that. Or no, that's too broad. They're going to figure out how to determine what the problem is within a short period of time. Not all day, 15 minutes. Let's take a look at another one. Why do we write these learning objectives? It sets expectations of learner performance. It helps you to understand what it is you want to do, and it becomes part of the blueprint, so you're communicating your instructional goal and intent to someone else. Always focus on educational instructional outcomes. Lets you set a target. Specifically, you can check out Dirksen's book, chapter 3, pages 70 to 79, specifically address writing learning objectives. So here we know that learning objectives set an expectations for what the learner is going to do. Listen very carefully. Listen very carefully. The learning objective is about what the learner will do, period. The learning objective is not what you plan to teach them. It is not what the learner will learn, because that verb learn is too vague. It has to be something very specific. Focus your objective on the learner output or performance. The learning objectives communicate to others and to yourself the major steps of the instructional process that you are going to write into your blueprint and then translate that into your mini lesson. The objectives guide assessment. You don't see the assessment in your light version of the planning document, but if you look at the big blueprint document, you will see assessment in the far right-hand corner of that matrix. Knowing what the end result is helps you plan better for the steps to get there. When you ask yourself the question first and foremost, what is it that I want my learners to be able to do? What do I want them to look like? How high do I want them to jump? You will then know better how to get them to achieve that particular goal, and to what degree do you want them to do it. The objectives always focus on the outcomes. The outcomes need to be something that's measurable, that you can observe, that shows the result of their learning. Very plainly, you cannot measure what you cannot see or observe. You don't know what's in that learner's head until what's in their head comes out in explicit ways. They are either going to speak it, they're going to write it, they're going to act it out, they're going to do it, they'll build something. But if it's in their head alone, or in their feelings or emotions internally, that's not measurable. So what is this thing about writing objectives? There is a structured way to do it, because this is about systematic design of instruction. We have systems and processes and structures to do this, so we can systematically get it done similarly in the same way, the same level of quality each time that we want to do it. That is what our field is about. Breaking down an objective comes in 3 parts: performance, conditions, and criteria. We're going to go into each of these a little bit more closely. The performance is what? It's the behavioral verb, and check out Bloom's taxonomy. Then we have more Bloom's taxonomy coming up later. That was just a little commercial break. Very important to know what the performance is. Your objectives will always have performance. All of my objectives have performance. Not all of my objectives have conditions. And the conditions are the circumstances. And those are the things that tell the learner what they're given in order to do the performance. So if it was jump rope and you want your learner to jump 50 times with a rope, you got to give them the rope. If you want your learners to calculate something with a calculator, you've got to give them the calculator, or they have to bring it. It has to be part of what is being assessed in the performance. The criterion is, how well do you want them to perform? Is that 100%? Is that 90%? Is that 7 out of 10? Is that 3 out of 5? It informs the learner of what the performance criteria is. The man who came up with these 3 conditions, his name is Robert McGriff, very famous in our field. You can click on 1997 and it will take you to his book, which is still a seminal text in this field. If you want to know more about Robert McGriff and all of his thinking about how to write learning objectives, he is the master. Check out the Learn More link. Here's an example focusing on the performance, the what, the behavioral verb, which you draw that right out of Bloom's taxonomy. Pause, take a look, go click right now, Bloom's taxonomy, take a read, come on back. The behavioral verb states a blank that you can observe, whatever it is that you chose. You must be able to directly view the blank that you said the learner needed to do, or you need to see the result of the blank that you asked the learner to do. Let's keep going. Examples of performance verbs. Here's some pretty clear. Direct observation. Measure 1 cup of water. Student does it. You see the water in the cup. Ta-da! Or they take a picture of it. Ta-da! It's done. Create an oil painting. What's the result? An oil painting. Load the dishwasher. Check and observe how was it loaded. And so on. Every one of these particular performance verbs and goals, objectives, is very clear, straightforward. Notice how each of them starts with the verb. Change, disassemble, climb, orally, take, load. There are some kinds of performance verbs that are indirect. Solve these 10 mathematics problems that you just handed the student a worksheet. You may not see how they do it, but when they hand in the worksheet, you will see evidence of their work. If you ask students to describe the difference between aptitude and attitude, it is an unobservable description until they speak it. So to say describe, to make this a more clear performance objective, you would have to ask, how did you want them to describe it? In writing, in pictures, in an infographic, in music, in dance, in a theatrical performance. Has to be more clear. So you can't directly measure what they know about the difference between aptitude and attitude until it becomes explicit. Write an essay, same thing. You don't know anything the student knows until they've written the essay and they turn that in as evidence. It's indirect observation of their knowledge because of the evidence of what they've written. I know that gets a little vague and fuzzy right there. Just hold on to the idea. And if I observe or I'm looking at your objectives that you've written and I give you feedback that says that's an indirect thing, you'll know that's kind of what I was thinking about. We are talking about objectives in the cognitive domain, the stuff that's in your head. And the best way to write an objective is you start with that powerful verb coming off of Bloom's taxonomy. The right verb precisely states what you want that learner to demonstrate. Important concept right here in this middle part of the slide, KSAs, knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Only 3 things in the world that you can teach somebody: knowledge, skills, and attitude. Knowledge, skills, and attitude, KSAs. The cognitive domain of learning requires someone's mind and knowledge to act on that objective. This is where Mr. Bloom enters the room. Here's a look at his revised taxonomy. There are his original taxonomies out there, which were revised in 2002, 2004, somewhere there, by a graduate student that was working with Mr. Bloom when he originally did this in 1956. Let's take a look. They put it in a hierarchy because it really is in a hierarchy. At the lowest end of our pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy are what we call the lower order thinking skills: remember, understand, and apply. At the upper end, we have the higher order thinking skills, also known as HOTS. The HOTS are analyze, evaluate, and create. Every level, so let's take analyze as an example. Everything below analyze, apply, understand, and remember is subsumed when the learner can analyze something. If they could analyze, they can also apply, understand, and remember. If the learner can only remember, there's not much lower than that. That's just recall of facts and basic concepts. If they can remember, it does not mean they may understand. It does not mean they may be able to apply. And most of all, their simple ability to recall facts does not necessarily lead them into the opportunity or ability to create. Notice that create is at the highest order on the taxonomy. That was a significant part of the revision that Mr. Crotwell came up with. You can take a look at what each of the 6 levels means. I'm going to add this to the graphic to tell you that in the lower order thinking skills, LOTS, L-O-T-S, that's where declarative knowledge is. It's just knowing stuff. It's knowing facts, concepts, and processes and procedures. It's in the higher skills that you engage in more intellectual activity. If you can write objectives in the intellectual skills, higher order thinking skills, remember, it will subsume every level below that. That the learner will already, if they can accomplish the evaluate, they can accomplish everything below it. We want to teach in the higher order thinking skills. We would love for schools to have objectives and learning outcomes always related in the higher order thinking skills. That Bloom's taxonomy, there's lists of them, in which are, there will be links on the next slide to take you to some of those lists. Those are observable verbs that operate in the cognitive domain. These are 3 resources. Each one is a clickable link. The first one, in words, leads you to a document of words. The other 2 give you a visual graphical representation. That infographic in the middle is totally rockin' awesome. I encourage you to click on it and take a closer look. If you want a copy of that, I believe that link will take you to a place where you can download a higher resolution version for your use. But wait, it isn't just about thinking. We do other things in teaching and learning too, don't we? There are other domains. So while Bloom's addresses the cognitive domain, there are also the affective and psychomotor domains. Affective domain is hard to measure because it deals with attitudes, feelings, appreciations, and expressions. Not easy to measure. So let's take a quick look. Here's a group of verbs that come out of the affective domain. Take a look at those. The other domain is the psychomotor domain of physical skills and activities. That would require practice and can be measured in terms of speed, precision, how far, how fast, how high, or techniques of execution. Rather than list out the kinds of verbs that are in the psychomotor domain, which I think you can easily imagine, Mr. Simpson came up with a classification system. And there are 7 levels of this. If you click on that link to that document, it will give you greater detail of each of those 7 categories for the psychomotor domain. In summary, whether you're working in the cognitive, affective, or psychomotor domain, it is always a statement of the observable behavior as precise as you can make it. The chosen verb is always tied to something. I call that something the subject matter reference. This is kind of getting into language grammar. Another way of putting it is, the verb by itself is absolutely useless until it's qualified with content like the conditions and the criteria that are part of the performance. It's where is the performance going to happen and how well should it be going on. Do you need to take a break? If so, go. Enjoy the time. Come on back and we'll get started again. Welcome back. Make sure you've got your documents going because we're getting into writing some objectives. We started with the performance verb, but the second part of the 3 parts of writing a learning objective is getting into the conditions or the circumstances in which this objective is going to happen. What is the learner given in order to be able to perform as they've been asked? So as you think about it, you want to state the conditions. If you do it now, it saves you time later when you're wondering, oh, was I supposed to remember to bring paper for this instructional activity? You build it into the blueprint in advance. You will know that you need to prep for it and have it ready. Maybe you need to build a website. Maybe you need a clock. Maybe you need a calculator. Maybe you need rulers and sticks. Maybe you can do a science experiment. What is all the stuff you need? What's all the stuff that the learner needs? Oh my goodness, it could be endless. Write it down now. What must the learner have in order to be able to accomplish the performance that you want them to do? Named off a few of these already. Take a look. They're just ideas for more. Transitioning to the third part, the criterion. How well do you want learners to be able to perform something? Listen, it's great to write the criterion, but I also know from experience it's not easy to write the criterion, and it isn't going to, let's just say we're doing a small size project in our course. Your mini lesson doesn't have to have this level of criterion. If you are writing this for professional purposes, for something outside of our class, then I would highly recommend that you write down the performance degree and the level of degree of excellence that or mastery that you want the learner to achieve, but not for our project. So what you're going to hear over the next few slides about criterion is for your professional understanding, but not for your application to our mini lesson project in this course. Criterion comes out like this. How well do you want the learner to be able to do something? 10 out of 50? How much of precision do you want them to have without spilling more than 3 grams of a chemical or a substance? How accurate of a measurement? How complete do you want them to do something? What about timing, speed? It sets a standard for performance. You want to be clear about that when you write this so that you can be clear about it when you give instructions to the student before they start in on the objective. Now, where in the world do we get these criteria from anyway? Oh, there are many places. I'm so glad that you asked. A lot of it comes from standards that might be for that content area. They may be published benchmarks. Maybe you're trying to achieve something far greater than the competitive company that your company is fighting against. It can come from it. Your manager says, I want it like this. You might have learned about it by doing your learner analysis. You may have learned about it from a SME, a subject matter expert, who suggested standards of performance that need to be achieved. What in the world could the benefits of an objective possibly be? And why is this slide deck so long? It's important. Here's why. Objectives help establish an agreement between people working on this particular project. Right now, you might be working by yourself, but typically that's not how instructional design goes. When you are writing out objectives, you write it with precision to remove the ambiguity of what you're asking someone to do. Oh, in fact, I am sure right now in our class, you're reading things that I've put up there and you're wondering, what does he mean? What does he want me to do? And if it isn't me, you know you've had a class where you've said, what's that teacher want me to do? It helps us get very clear and very explicit about what we're trying to accomplish. 2, when you're responsible for ensuring that the objectives are met, you want to make sure that you've written objectives that can be measured and that performance of those objectives is possible given the conditions that you've stated. 3, writing out those objectives with that much detail provides a means for distinguishing between the different classes of behaviors that you want to lead the learner through in the instruction. So you know how boring things can be if everything that you do from one objective to the next is listen to the lecture, complete the worksheet, listen to the next lecture, complete the worksheet. Somebody didn't do a good job writing out their objectives and coming up with some variations on the instructional strategies. That's why we write these out, so we can see them and go, oh, this is the same boring routine again and again and again. There are many different ways to bring in instructional strategies to accomplish the objective by either having the students listen, watch, work together in groups, produce something. 4, it's a way of organizing and sequencing your learning. In digital form, you can take an objective and rearrange it first, second, third, fourth one first, third one second, whatever. You can mix and match and rearrange it so that it makes more sense. When you're writing these objectives, use the active voice. If you look at the objectives I've written for the course, or some examples I've given here in the slide deck, start with that active verb, strong active verb. Don't use a passive voice, use an active voice. An example of a passive voice would be something like this. The project will be presented. Huh? Aren't you just saying, present the project? You're talking to the learner. The learner will be able to present the project. It's not a suggestion. The project will be presented is in the passive voice. So that's one of those English language art things. I kind of got a feel for it, but I'm not real sharp always on explaining it. If we've got any English Lit people in the group, speak up, post it in discussion. At last. Very important to understand when you are designing instruction. When anyone designs instruction, it comes through the filter of who they are. It includes all of their biases, perspectives, and orientation to the world, the field, the content. It's important to know that the instruction designed through that person comes with a level of bias. Someone had to make a decision about what the problem was that needed to be solved in the first place. Someone chooses to focus that learning in particular ways to correct that problem. Everyone who designs instruction has a value system. They have biases. They've got perspectives. They have got an agenda that they are trying to achieve. Now, that does not necessarily mean something bad is going on. It just means you have to be aware that when you're designing instruction, it comes with your viewpoints and your personality. It comes with what you know and how you know it and your experiences in this world. Many times we are asked to design something that is contrary to either our personal beliefs or values, but part of a professional contract is we need to develop the instruction. So understanding where our biases and our preferences and our viewpoints fall is an important part of writing out these objectives and trying to do the best we can for the clients that we are working for. Here's an idea for you. Let you read that. Some resources that I was using to give you additional ways of understanding what Dirksen is saying in her book and what I'm saying in this slide deck. These are great resources that I found on the web to further explain this idea of writing learning objectives. Take a look. Each one of them is a great reference for you. Because this is an academic course, there is research behind these concepts. I give these to you more as a reference point that you may continue to take courses in this field, and here are some texts that could be useful for you in that regard. Content comes out of Design for How People Learn. Dirksen does a nice job guiding us through writing learning objectives in the context in which you would normally encounter the opportunity to write them. I like her style. I like her little drawings, kind of stick figure drawings in the book. That's pretty cool. And we are Finny. Till next time.